Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Miss Murphy. I'm here to demonstrate a few watercolor techniques that we are going to be applying into your watercolor unit. So we're going to start out with some practice and some experimentation. These are some of the basics of watercolor techniques that everyone should know as they delve into the wonderful world of watercolors. And so just let me talk about what you need. You will need a piece of 8.5 by 11 or 9 by 12 sketchbook paper. Don't use anything too thin like printer paper because you want something that's going to absorb the water and that's not going to make a hole in the paper. Also, you will need your fabulous set of glitter fabulous watercolor. Unless you have your own watercolors, this was the set that was given to you in your materials package, so you want to make sure you have that ready. And also a brush. I believe this came with a brush. I'm using a different one today. I also have my can of water. You don't need a lot of water. And also a paper towel. Mine is used, but I use that paper towel or even a tissue. I prefer paper towels because it absorbs better. And of course your pencil. So we're going to begin with our paper. This is an example of what we're making. So today we're going to talk about making a wet on wet, drop color on wet, dry brush, flat wash, gradation, and blending with layers, as well as an experimental section where you are going to apply those techniques. So you need to have your blank paper first, and you want to get it set up. So we have 6 techniques, and then the bottom is for experimentation. If you want to use a ruler, you may. I just basically wrote on the top of my paper first, watercolor techniques. Doesn't have to be fancy, but I'm just labeling it, and I'm going to set that aside for myself there. So you're going to have 3 squares here, 3 squares here, and 1 rectangle on the bottom. And so I'm just going to go ahead and draw those out. Like I said, if you want to use a ruler, you may. But I just sort of space them out so that there's enough room on my paper. I'm not doing the best job here, but that's okay. As long as they're all relatively the same size. Space that one out a little too far there. So I start out by just drawing my simple, very lightly too, drawing my squares out, and then I'm going to label them, and then I'm going to apply my techniques. So I apologize that my squares aren't perfect, but part of the lesson here is that it doesn't need to be perfect. All right, so I'm going to also draw a rectangle on the bottom because I like to experiment when I paint. So I'm leaving a little room for experimentation down here where I am going to practice applying my techniques below. So I have my watercolor techniques here, and I have my brush ready. So if you have other brushes that you want to use, typically I use this brush here, but I know that it came with a watercolor brush. If you have a flat brush, I would recommend using something smaller, not too thick, just because of what we're doing and the size of the space. Oops, forgot something. So before we begin, let's label our sections here. So I'm gonna make this one wet on wet. This is going to be drop color on wet. This is going to be my dry brush. That's my 3rd one. My 4th one here is just a basic flat wash. And then I have my gradation as well as my blending layers section. And then last but not least, experiment. I'm putting with 3. If you do more, that's okay. But I put with at least 3, okay? That way it gives you a little room down here to experiment with at least 3 of the techniques and combine them and see what you come up with. All right, so hopefully you can see all my sections here. And I apologize if this is tilted. My filming is not up to par, but you know, I'm getting there. So I'm gonna start out and have my watercolor open. One thing that I want to emphasize with you is that you want to make sure that you're not using too much water more than necessary, because then you're just going to have a drippy mess on here, okay? So little saying that I used to use with my elementary students back in the day was little water, not a lot. Sounds kind of cheesy, but it works. All right. So first technique, and you know, some of these might sound familiar to you because maybe you've done them before, but I always believe that even if you've done something before and you're like, okay, yeah, I've learned that, you always gonna learn something new when you try it again. And it's always great to practice so that you can recall that information as you're, you know, getting back into that medium, whatever it may be, watercolor, acrylics, whatever type of medium it is. It's always great to practice, even if you think, you know, I am always learning. I am, you know, I've been painting for a long time, but I don't paint all the time. So I need to practice. I still need to learn. So we're going to start with the wet on wet here. So basically that's just getting, remember you want to have your water ready. And I want to show you guys this real quick. But when I get my water out, I let that water drip into the can. And then that way I don't have it dripping out all over the place. So I'm going to start out by wetting the paper in that section. You want to just get it moderately, you know, go around the edges. Imagine you're painting with invisible paint is what I like to do. And I really like to see to make sure that I have that section wet. So I'm going to pick a color here from my watercolors. And actually, I'm going to move this down here so you can see my paint. So I'm going to pick this glorious purple. I'm not going to pick up too much, but now I'm going to do my wet on wet here. And basically what this does is create a watercolor wash. I could add a little more to this gradually if I want, but basically I want to see how that watercolor spreads and try to get, you know, it doesn't have to look even, but the idea is to see what a watercolor wash does. The wet paper dilutes the watercolor. It makes it easier to spread. So it depends on what you're painting on how you would apply that. And we'll get into that further as we continue in this unit. So the next one, we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to play a little. So I'm going to add water onto the paper. And then I am going to add a drop color on wet. So I'm going to take my brush here. I'm picking a red now, being dangerous. Oh my gosh. So I'm picking a red. Oh, always make sure you're washing your brush before you go into each color, because then you're going to wind up destroying, especially if you're going from like a red to a yellow or, you know, dark to a lighter color. Wash your brush. You might want to blot it out sometimes if you're changing colors off with your paper towel. So I'm going to get my square wet. That's why we make a little square, okay? Then I'm going to drop my color in like so. And so I'm going to see what happens. I might pick another color in there. It's just fun to play. And that's what really this is all about, is like sometimes you discover different effects as you go. And these are just basics, but they're going to help you show a little more diversity in your skills of watercolor and also help you understand your techniques a little better. So dry brush. Okay, now we're going in the opposite direction. So what I literally do is I dry my brush off, and I, like I said, to have a napkin or paper towel to blot it out. Then I'm going to take my green, whichever color you choose. Typically, I use the end of the brush. Now, this kind of reminds me of grass, so think about like what you might use that for one day if you're using a dry brush. So, try that out. That's really great for adding texture. You can do that. Let's say I let my wet on wet dry, and then I could try some dry brush on top of that, and then I've created another layer in my painting. So, you know, this kind of, like I said, reminds me of grass here. There are a lot of things that you could apply dry brush on to create that texture that you want. So, practice your dry brush, and then we're going to move on to our flat wash. I'm going to move my watercolors out of the way here because they're kind of in the way. And I am going to now demonstrate how to do the flat wash. So I'm going to wash my brush off. Let you guys get ready there for the next one. Make sure you're cleaning your brush as you go. Okay. So for my flat wash, I am going to now just create a basic wash. I'm not getting my paper wet. All I'm doing is getting my brush a tad bit wet. I'm going to select my color. And then I'm just going to apply a nice even wash on my paper. So there is an actual skill to this because you don't want to show like dark to light. You want it to be even. Thus, that is why it is called a flat wash. So it is a flat wash. It's just a basic, like if you were doing a background, a sky, you wanted it to be one plain flat color, then I'm just gonna, I'm gonna pretend that actually. So I'm gonna use blue here, and I'm gonna create my flat wash. So you wanna have some, you wanna make it even and consistent. So what I usually do is just kind of take my brush carefully as I go. I'm not really adding anything to this right now. And if it's starting to look lighter and I need to add a little more paint, I could, but I'm going to try to spread it, spread that paint up there as I go. If you have enough on your brush to begin with, I should have had maybe a little more. So I'm just gonna, but you want it to be even. I kind of messed up, but that's okay. I want to spread it out, but you don't want it to look like dark to light. So basically this is just a very flat wash. This is really good to do with a flat brush actually. But as you can see, I want to make it even and consistent. I'm being a little particular about my edges here. So I have a nice flat edge, nice flat wash. So there's nothing that I really did except just paint it nice and flat. You want to have like an even distribution of color, and take your time with that. Okay. So now I'm going to use actually a different color for my gradation, but I'm going to give you a moment just to wash your brush. Okay. Gradation, meaning that we are going from dark to light. So we are going to start with our green. Well, whatever color, you don't have to use green. So I start with a lot of color on my brush, not too much water. I have a little more than I wanted there, but that's okay. And I sort of start at the top here, and then actually I'm going to blot my brush that had a little too much water. If you notice you have too much water, you can just kind of spread it around carefully. But as you know, the more water you add, the lighter something is going to get, right? The lighter your paint is going to get. So I start dragging this down here from the top. But now I'm going to take my brush and now I'm going to apply a little more water as I get further down and then keep diluting it a little bit further. So I made another little section, but not too much water on the brush. A little water, not a lot of. And I am gradually bringing this down. And then you'll notice that you can probably go back in. So basically you're creating this gradual transition from dark to light. Now I think I probably started out with a little too much water there. It's been a while since I've done this, but sometimes you can just paint a little more solid and then just drag from that edge. All right, so you should see that it gradually goes from dark to light. I did a little bit better on my previous one, as you can see, and I will demonstrate that again in class. All right, blending of layers. Okay, so now that you're going to be blending layers, you want to think about what colors to choose, because if you choose colors that are complementary, you're going to get muddy colors. So I generally tend to practice the blending of layers with analogous colors or like warm colors and cool colors, which generally tend to be analogous at times. So I'm going to use, for example, this is sort of like an orange color and the yellow, since they are analogous and side by side on the color wheel. So I'm going to try that. So blending of layers is what we did just here, except now instead of applying only water, I'm going to apply a lighter color here. So I'm going to start out with my darker value, which is, well, actually I decided to go with red. Never mind. I thought I was going to use orange. So I'm going to start out with my red here. And then I'm going to, and I should have added a little less water there, but that's all right. Sometimes I let it just dry, just a tad. And then I'm going to take my yellow, and this is my lighter value. Okay, remember, you don't want to pick a color that is complementary, so I obviously would want to pick green because I would make a muddy color. So now I take my yellow like right on that edge, and then I start to gradually blend them together in the middle, but I'm still kind of creating this gradation with both colors. It's kind of cool to do. Imagine if you were doing like a sunset. So I don't want to see too much water in here, because then you get those, see those little, how it blends in there too much. So I just want you to show that it goes from dark to light. If you do wind up adding, now this is a good thing to know, like if you do add too much water, sometimes I just take a little bit of my paper towel, and then I can go back on there and then just drag it out. We're going to be getting into like creating texture and whatnot with different things, but today I just wanted to focus on these essential techniques. There are a lot more, but I'm focusing on these specifically for what we're doing. And then in this section below, you get to play. So I want you to think about what we just did here. Now, if you want to paint an actual scene, or if you want to do like a sunset landscape, whatever you want to do down here, it can be just experimental abstract. I want you to take at least 3 or more of these techniques to create something using all of them combined. So at least 3 of them. You can do all of them. Be my guest. So what I did here, just to show you what I did, I experimented with the wet on wet. Then I actually added a bit of a blending of layers over here. I did over here another like wash, but then I did a dry brush on top. But it kind of went in between like doing a dry brush. But I would say one really good thing to do is let it dry in between sometimes, and then you can go on top of it with some other techniques. So like I let it dry a little bit before I went on there. So think about what you can create below. Make sure that you kind of understood each one. If you feel like you want to do it again and practice it make it better, then try it again on another piece of paper. But down below, you can really make anything you want. So decide what you want to do, and remember that, it's practice. So you really are just here to experiment and also understand these techniques. So good luck with your watercolor techniques experiments. Make sure that you take your time with each one if you have to pause the video as you're going. And don't forget to label them and before you upload your work for this assignment. Thank you.